France and the United States of America have been allies for centuries. And yet, despite the mutual fascination and admiration, they can rub each other the wrong way.
You might say that they're best frenemies. Now, being Franco-American, this one is really personal. How much of it is due to fundamental cultural differences, and how much of it is things just getting lost in translation?
Join us for this episode of French Connections Plus, where we dive into the love-hate relationship between France and America. That great symbol of Franco-American friendship, the Statue of Liberty.
The statue, which stands in New York Harbor, was actually a gift from the people of France to the people of the United States. It was designed by the French sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, and the metal framework was built by Gustave Eiffel, who went on to build the Eiffel Tower.
Now, the original Statue of Liberty was dedicated in New York in October 1886, but there are many replicas of the statue around the world, including several here in Paris.
Now, the original statue, which was built in honor of U.S. independence, was seen as a joint Franco-American commitment to the ideal of liberty. Because remember, the two republics were founded on very similar political philosophies and the ideals of liberty, equality, and justice.
France and the USA have strong ties that go back centuries. In many ways, they wouldn't exist as they are today if they didn't have each other.
France and the U.S. have had each other's backs for centuries. The two allies have never officially been at war with each other and have often fought by each other's side. During America's Revolutionary War against England, France's help was decisive in the U.S.'s eventual victory and independence. During World War I, Americans fought alongside the French and other allies. And after the Great War, the French capital became a beacon for Americans hungry for a life without consequences. The so-called Lost Generation, including Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, as well as many African Americans eager to escape segregation like Josephine Baker. During the Second World War, the U.S. played an instrumental role in liberating France from Nazi occupation. A cemetery in Normandy honoring U.S. soldiers who died in the conflict is officially considered American territory. After the September 11th terrorist attacks, newspaper Le Monde echoed what many French people thought in its editorial. Nous sommes tous Américains. We are all Americans. But relations took a sour turn after France's refusal to participate in the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. This led to freedom fries being served at the congressional cafeteria. But despite the ups and downs, Franco-American military, political, and intelligence cooperation remains crucial today.
Many of you had questions about Franco-American relations, particularly about how we see each other, like Santoni, who wanted to know, what is the stereotypical American to the French?
Where can I begin, Genie? The stereotypical American is loud and obsessed with money and puritanical and not very cultured or sophisticated and convinced that America is the best country in the world without necessarily knowing that much about the rest of the world.
French people see America as a country of extremes, extreme wealth, extreme cars. Everything is supersized, including the people. But the American stereotype of the French isn't much better.
Well, the cliche goes that French people are rude and negative and overly confident and with questionable hygiene, and also convinced that France is the best country in the world.
That being said, there still is a lot of mutual admiration between the two countries.
Well, a lot of French people are fascinated by the American dream and convinced that the U.S. is still a land of opportunity and modernity.
Meanwhile, Americans love the French way of life, the wine, the cheese, the delicious baguettes, not to mention French art, culture, and fashion.
So that's a list of generic stereotypes, but I thought I'd go and ask for a second opinion.
Loud, overweight, religious, owns a gun, thinks that they're the center of the world.
Work alcoolique.
Ignorant.
Really loud, really badly dressed. Une grande bouche. hyper large avec des grandes dents, mais très grandes et très blanches.
Kind of fat and dumb.
Rude, judgmental, snobby, well-dressed.
Like sort of a superiority complex, thinks that they're better than you.
They never smile. They complain a lot about everything.
Eats a lot of cheese, very romantic, and a little bit smelly.
Paris, la Tour Eiffel, donc il y a toute cette imagerie autour du lover, quoi, du French lover.
Qu'est-ce que j'admire chez les Américains?
The houses,
Some solidarity.
the cars too. I like their joie de vivre.
They like good wine and it's not too expensive.
C'est le pays où on peut partir de rien pour arriver au top.
Je trouve pas. Amis, mais profondément différents, ça on est d'accord.
In the way that they view the world, in what they want for themselves, and what they want for their country, I'd say they're more similar than different.
There is this mutual love-hate thing that goes on, and it'll probably continue for a long time to come, I think.
The Franco-American relationship has been tested many times over the years, but has always overcome its differences. Gone are the days of freedom fries and throwing Bordeaux down the drain. There are still tensions today, though, particularly when it comes to trade.
Well, the United States is France's second largest trading partner just after Germany, and French people are massive consumers of American products and brands. Take, for example, McDonald's. As surprising as it may be, France, the land of gastronomy, is actually the second largest market for the fast food chain just after the United States.
Moreover, McDonald's is the biggest restaurant chain in France. Proof, once again, that while the French may criticize American culture, they do love it. Not just the food, but the music, the movies. For example, American films consistently sell more tickets than French ones.
And this can be a source of tension because remember, in France, there's a state system in place to promote and protect French culture. It's called l'exception culturelle, the cultural exception.
We've talked about this before on French Connections. The idea is to try and block the dominance of American culture by providing state subsidies to support the French arts and other specialty products.
And this has annoyed the American administration, which has threatened to levy taxes on French products like wine and cheese. Spats like these raise the question, are the two systems in place polar opposites?
To find out more about the Franco-American relationship, I'm joined by John or Rick MacArthur, the president of the prestigious Harper's Magazine in New York City. Rick, thank you so much for being on the show. You yourself are Franco-American and you write extensively in English and in French on politics and culture. France and America are often pitted as rival models, with America being all about free market capitalism, France a paternalistic socialist state. Do you think that cliche is true?
Well, I think it's still largely true. Unfortunately, it's becoming less true. And in France, with so much dirigiste power and energy coming from the government, there isn't this cult of the individual entrepreneur, the individual capitalist that we have in this country. I don't see a lot of slackers in France who don't want to work, who just want to live off the welfare state. I don't buy that cliche, but there is a big difference between the centralized state control or state influence in France and the more disorganized system of capitalism that we have here.
One thing that's fascinating is that both countries share basic tenets. For instance, freedom is fundamental to the psyche in both the United States and in France. Liberté, égalité, fraternité is the French motto. We talk about liberty and justice for all. But do you think that the notion of freedom is the same in both countries?
Well, the freedom to do whatever you want to do in the United States has a kind of destructive aspect to it. Mm-hmm. I mean, cut down the forests, dig out all the coal and the oil, regardless of what effects it has on the environment. The rights of the individual and the property owner are very, very strong. Whereas in France, there's less freedom to act unilaterally. In the realm of the mind, of thinking, of thought and speech, I think the French system is much more open and adventurous.
What would you say is unique about the Franco-American friendship?
Well, the unique thing about it is that we share this revolutionary heritage that is not always acknowledged, but is real. I mean, Jefferson was in Paris during the Revolution, during the French Revolution. And we also share a very important constitutional heritage in the form of the separation of powers, which we take from Montesquieu. And we also do, at least formally, respect the rights of man.
Just one last question, Rick. As a fellow Franco-American, do you think that fundamentally we are more similar, or are there just differences that we can't overcome?
Oh, I think ultimately there are differences that we can't overcome. Thank goodness. It makes it hard for people like you and me because we're divided. I mean, I live with it. I do live with the psychological and emotional division between my French and my American sides. I mean, they come into conflict, which makes life more interesting, but in some ways more stressful.
Rick, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been such a treat to talk to you about this.
Thanks. Thank you.
The history of Franco-American relations is a long and beautiful one. And sure, there have been stumbles in the past, and there will be stumbles in the future. But after all, France is America's oldest ally.
Despite the feuds, the relationship is anchored by the weight of history and shared values.
Well, they might not manifest the same way, but our core values are pretty much the same. In fact, when push comes to shove, we're more similar than different. Trust me on this one.
But being a French citizen myself for the past few years, I'd have to say that we're not quite as compatible as all that. We might just have to agree to disagree on that one.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. But if you have any questions, do reach out on social media.
And we'll see you next time for the next French Connections Plus.
You know I'm right, Genie.
That's so French.